They say you always remember the exact moment your life splits in two. For me, it was a Tuesday, 2:14 p.m., to be exact, when my phone rang and my dad's name flashed on the screen. We weren't close. In fact, if I'm being brutally honest, we were barely speaking. Years of tension, broken promises, and his selective parenting had left us in this weird no-man's land of forced birthday calls and passive-aggressive Christmas texts. So yeah, seeing his name mid-workday made my stomach flip for all the wrong reasons. But something in me still answered. Maybe it was habit, maybe guilt, maybe that part of you that never fully stops hoping a parent might finally show up the way you needed them to when you were a kid. "Monica," he said, and I knew instantly something was wrong. His voice sounded like it had been wrung out. Hoarse, shaky, like he'd been crying. And my dad, crying. The man who once told me, tears are for people who don't have a plan. I felt ice creep into my chest. He told me he was sick. Cancer. The kind that doesn't wait. It had started in his lungs and spread. "Stage 4, he said, almost whispering it like he was ashamed. And just like that, all the resentment, all the distance between us, collapsed into one blinding wave of panic and heartbreak. I didn't even question it. I just listened, my hand over my mouth, heart racing like I'd just run into traffic. I asked about treatments. He said they were exploring options. I asked about insurance. He dodged it. I offered to come see him, and he said, "Only if you have the time," which somehow made it worse. Like he already assumed I wouldn't bother. That guilt, it latched on fast and hard. The thing is, when your parent tells you they're dying, your brain doesn't go into logic mode. It goes into fix-it mode. I started calculating immediately how much PTO I had, how much money I could send, if I could break my lease and move closer to help him out. I felt like a horrible daughter for not being there already, for not noticing he'd been sick, for being too wrapped up in my own life. And maybe that's the cruelest part of all of it, how fast I was ready to forgive everything. The missed birthdays, the forgotten school plays, the fact that he left my mom and barely paid child support. I was prepared to let all of it go just to make his final months more comfortable. Just to prove to myself that I was better than he ever managed to be. I didn't know it then, but that phone call wasn't the start of his illness. It was the start of the longest con I've ever seen. And I was his mark. When someone you love tells you they're dying, you don't think, you move. Within 2 weeks of that call, I'd rearranged my life like it was a chessboard, and I was desperate to get out of checkmate. I broke my lease, packed up my apartment in a frenzy, and took a leave of absence from my job. Originally just a month, but I knew deep down I wouldn't be back anytime soon. I moved into a short-term rental near his house, a sad little bungalow with flickering lights and a leaking kitchen faucet. It didn't matter. I wasn't there for comfort. I was there for him. He didn't ask for money, not directly. That was the clever part. He just mentioned things. How his insurance had lapsed. How experimental treatments were incredibly expensive. How his pain was getting worse, and his heating bills were out of control. And every time he let something like that slip, I felt like I was watching him drown while holding a life raft. What else could I do but throw it to him? So I started transferring money. First $500, then $1,200. Then $3,000 for what he said was an upfront consultation at a cancer center in another state. He never pressured me. He didn't need to. I volunteered everything like I was trying to buy my way into heaven. And honestly, maybe I was. Part of me believed, hoped, that if I just showed up enough, gave everything, maybe I'd finally have the relationship with my dad I always wanted. Maybe the cancer had softened him. Maybe he'd finally see me. I remember one day in particular. It was raining, and I'd just driven him home from what he claimed was a chemo prep appointment. He was quiet, withdrawn. I assumed he was in pain. I offered to pick up his prescriptions, and he looked at me, so gentle, so frail, and said, "You're too good to me, Monica. I don't deserve you." And I cried, right there in his driveway, sitting in my car, because it was the first time in my entire life that he'd said something even remotely kind to me. I clung to that moment like it meant something, like it proved this nightmare was building towards some kind of redemption arc. That he was changing. That we were. The days turned into weeks, and my life, my real life, started to unravel. I burned through my savings. My job grew impatient. I lied to my friends about where I was, about what was happening. And every time I started to question it, why he never seemed to lose weight, why he never looked as sick as he claimed, I'd shut the thoughts down. I'd tell myself I was being cynical, cold, that not everyone reacts the same way to illness. Maybe he was one of the lucky ones who still looked okay on the outside. Maybe I was just scared of getting close to someone who was already halfway gone. There was one night I'll never forget. I woke up around 2 a.m. and couldn't sleep, so I walked the few blocks to his house just to check on him. I had a key. He insisted I take one in case of emergencies. But when I got there, I saw him through the window, awake, laughing, drinking a beer, watching some late-night poker show with the volume up. There was no sign of pain, no sign of chemo fatigue, just a man perfectly at ease. I stood outside in the dark for maybe 5 minutes, frozen, telling myself not to overreact, telling myself he deserved joy, even in the midst of suffering. I went home. I said nothing. And the next morning, when I asked how he was feeling, he winced and said, "Rough night. Barely slept." That was the first time I didn't believe him. I brushed it off, of course. I wanted to believe. I needed to believe. Because if he wasn't sick, if all of this was a lie, then I wasn't a devoted daughter. I was a fool. And fools don't get sympathy. They just get used. It didn't happen all at once. I didn't wake up one day and say, "Oh, he's faking it." If anything, I fought the truth harder than I've ever fought anything. The cracks in his story didn't scream. They whispered. They came like shadows at the edge of a spotlight. Subtle, shifting, easy to explain away if you wanted to. And God help me, I wanted to. The first real crack came from something stupid, cereal. I was at his house one morning dropping off groceries, and I noticed his pantry was stocked with sugary crap he never ate before. Captain Crunch, honey buns, soda, stuff he used to say would kill a man faster than a bullet. I joked about it, trying to keep it light, and he laughed it off. Said something like, "May as well enjoy it while I still can." But it gnawed at me. The last time I'd helped someone with actual cancer, my friend Lucy's mom, their diet was a thing. Doctors gave strict guidelines. No processed sugar, limited red meat, lots of hydration. But my dad, he was eating like a frat boy on a dare. Then there were the appointments. At first, he insisted I didn't come with him. "They're just consults," he'd say. "I don't want to drag you into all the depressing stuff." It seemed fair. He said the hospital was overwhelming, that he wanted to protect me. But when I finally did press to come along, he got weirdly evasive. Said his appointments kept getting rescheduled. Then he said the clinic had moved. And one time, this was the kicker, he said the hospital doesn't allow visitors due to liability. That's when something shifted. I remember sitting in my car after he said that, parked outside a CVS, just staring at the steering wheel thinking, that's not how hospitals work. Not in the city. Not for cancer consults. Not for family. So I did something I swore I'd never do. I snooped. I told myself it was for his safety. That if he really was sick, he needed an advocate. But I wasn't looking for medication schedules or doctor's notes. I was looking for anything to prove I wasn't crazy. That I wasn't being played. The first thing I noticed was his medicine cabinet, shockingly bare. Not a single prescription bottle. Just some ibuprofen, a crusty tube of Neosporin, and a travel-sized bottle of antacids. No nausea meds. No steroids. No painkillers. I asked casually what he was taking, and he said, "They're switching my protocol, so I'm in between rounds." At the time, I nodded. Now, I want to scream. Then came the day his story fully unraveled, just not in the way I expected. It started with a bank slip. He'd asked me to check his mail while he was at an infusion, and I did. Most of it was junk, but there was a torn envelope with a bank's logo I recognized. Curiosity got the better of me. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But when I opened it and saw a deposit confirmation for $7,500, my heart nearly stopped. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't from a loan. It was cash in. And not from me. I took a picture of it, sat in my car, and stared at it like it was a piece of a puzzle I'd never meant to finish. The next person I called was my cousin Tasha. She and my dad had always been weirdly close, and I figured maybe, just maybe, she'd know something I didn't. The second I mentioned the money, her voice dropped. She got quiet, said, "Wait, you've been giving him money." "Yes," I said slowly, suddenly cold. "Why?" And I'll never forget what she said next. "Monica, he told me you were helping take care of him. I didn't realize that meant financially. He's been going to poker nights at the lodge every week. Said he was finally back on his feet. Back on his feet." I thanked her and hung up, shaking. My throat felt dry. My hands were buzzing. That's when I started thinking back, really thinking. The new TV in his living room. The brand new golf clubs in his garage. The smell of fresh cologne that hadn't been in his bathroom 6 weeks ago. And then I saw it. I opened his laptop. He left it on the kitchen table all the time, password on a post-it like some relic from the 90s. I didn't expect to find anything, but there it was, a spreadsheet labeled expenses, and in it, my name, next to every amount I'd sent. $1,200, Monica, October 3rd. $800, Monica, October 17th. $3,000, Monica, November 2nd. Every dollar, tracked like inventory. I stared at that spreadsheet like it was a murder weapon. Because in a way it was. That's when it hit me. Not just that he was lying, but that this was never about illness. This was a strategy. A long game. I wasn't his daughter anymore. I was his retirement plan. And the worst part, I hadn't even told him I knew. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the couch in my rented bungalow, wrapped in a scratchy blanket that smelled like old laundry detergent and regret, staring at the ceiling as the realization sank in. My father, my own father, had been bleeding me dry while pretending to be dying. And he did it with a smile, with trembling hands, with carefully planted sighs and sad little stories about test results and sleepless nights. He played the part so well I could still hear the echo of his voice telling me, "Don't worry about the money, sweetheart. Just being here means more than anything." Now I knew exactly what being here had meant. Access. The next morning I didn't call. I didn't text. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, every tab a different piece of evidence. Screenshots of bank statements, pictures of that damn spreadsheet, a time-stamped photo of the beer in his hand during his supposed chemo week. I pulled together dates, matched withdrawals to the exact days. He claimed he was too weak to leave bed. My brain clicked into this strange, icy autopilot, like grief and rage were fighting for dominance, but neither had enough power to fully take over. I wasn't even crying anymore. I was documenting. Still, there was a part of me that needed confirmation. I don't know why. Maybe because some tiny thread of denial was still clinging to the fantasy that there was a misunderstanding. That it wasn't as ugly as it looked. That maybe the money was for something else. Maybe he had a secret debt. A gambling problem. Maybe he was sick, just not in the way he said. Maybe. No. I needed to hear him say it. So I planned my visit like I was preparing for a heist. I brought over soup and pretended nothing was wrong. He answered the door in sweatpants and that ridiculous Vietnam vet hat he wore to gain sympathy, even though he'd never served a day in the military. He said he was having a bad spell that morning. Said the side effects were getting worse. He looked me in the eyes and lied to my face. Again. Did the doctor say anything new? I asked, spooning soup into a bowl, watching him from the corner of my eye. He shook his head slowly. Same prognosis. But I'm fighting. And then, as if the universe wanted to make a point, his phone lit up on the counter. It was a notification from a sports betting app. I didn't even say anything. I just stared at it, long enough for him to follow my gaze. His hand moved quickly, flipping the phone over like he could erase what I'd seen. But the damage was done. Betting, huh? I said quietly, my voice flat. He hesitated, then shrugged, just to keep my mind busy. Couple bucks here and there. Is that what the $7,000 was for? To keep your mind busy. His whole face changed. Not in fear, not in guilt, but in calculation. I saw it. That flicker. Like a chess player trying to figure out if the game is salvageable. Like a man wondering if he's one lie away from pulling this off one more time. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, leaning back like he had nothing to hide. And that was it. That was my last straw. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photo of the bank slip, then the spreadsheet, then the screenshots of the betting transactions linked to the same account where I'd deposited the money. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just presented it all like I was laying evidence before a jury. He didn't even pretend to be surprised. He sat there in silence, eyes darting between the images. And then, like it was no big deal, he said, "You're overreacting. Overreacting." Like I'd just accused him of leaving dishes in the sink, not fabricating a terminal illness to scam his own daughter. I remember laughing. Not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe how calm he was, how easy it came to him. This man had spent months conning me, and the best defense he could muster was that I was being dramatic? "You said you were dying," I whispered. "I gave you everything. I sacrificed everything." He didn't apologize. He didn't beg. He just shrugged. "You've always been so emotional, Monica. That's your problem. You make things bigger than they are." And there it was. The moment I realized I'd never get an apology, never get the version of him I wanted, never get closure or healing or some tearful goodbye. I wasn't dealing with a broken man. I was dealing with a cold one. So I stood up. I took my phone, my keys, my dignity, and I walked out. But I wasn't done. Because if he thought I was emotional before, he hadn't seen anything yet. People like my dad count on two things: your silence and your shame. They rely on the idea that you won't tell anyone, because who wants to admit they were conned by their own flesh and blood? And more than anything, they count on you walking away quietly. That's their endgame. They want your money, your time, your trust, and then they want you to vanish so they can rewrite the story for the next target. I didn't vanish. The day after I left his house, I sat in my bungalow and made a list. Not just of what he'd taken, but of what he taught me. Because while he thought he was using me, what he really did was give me a masterclass in manipulation, control, and the power of narrative. And I decided if he was going to turn his life into a performance, then I'd be the one to write the final act. First, I froze my bank account, changed passwords, pulled every single automatic deposit or payment that had his name on it. That part was easy. Next came the petty part. I called the poker lodge where he liked to hang out, the one Tasha mentioned, and I spoke to the manager, a sweet woman named Debbie who'd known my dad for years. I told her everything. Calmly, factually, no drama, just the truth, that he'd been scamming people for sympathy and using their donations and goodwill to fund his gambling habit. She didn't say much, but 2 days later, I heard he'd been quietly asked not to return. Then I called my aunt, my mom's sister, a woman who always saw through my dad's charm but kept her distance after the divorce. I told her everything. She cried. Not for him, for me. And then she offered something I didn't expect. Her lawyer's number. "You don't need to sue him," she said. "But you do need protection." And that's when I realized this wasn't just about emotional closure. This was about stopping him from doing it to anyone else. So I filed a civil complaint. Fraud and misrepresentation. He hadn't signed anything, and technically, most of the money I gave him was under the table. But I had documentation, text messages, emails, his spreadsheet, my receipts. Enough to make a case. Enough to make him sweat. It wasn't about getting the money back. I knew I'd probably never see a cent. It was about putting it on record. About forcing him to answer questions from someone he couldn't lie to. And when the legal letter arrived, served to him at home, the same home I'd helped pay rent on, I imagined his face. The confusion, the panic, the loss of control. But my favorite part? I told the rest of the family. I didn't do it in a dramatic, blast the group chat kind of way. I made calls. Personal. One by one. I told each cousin, each sibling what had happened. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The facts were brutal enough. And each time I told it, I felt lighter. Less ashamed. More real. Some were shocked. Some weren't. One cousin admitted he'd loaned my dad $2,000 last year and never got it back. Another said he stopped talking to him after catching him in a lie about needing a ride to a hospital that didn't exist. Slowly, a picture emerged. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was who he was. And just like that, his web started unraveling. He called me once, left a voicemail, said he was hurt and disappointed that I'd gone nuclear over a misunderstanding. Said family doesn't treat each other like that. Said I'd broken his heart. I didn't call back. Because in that moment, I understood something I'd spent a lifetime avoiding. He didn't want a daughter. He wanted a sponsor, a supporter, an audience. And when I stopped playing my part, the show fell apart. But I wasn't done yet. I wrote my story. Not this one, but a public one. A long post on a private forum for adult children of narcissists. I changed names, of course, but I told it all. And the response was overwhelming. Hundreds of messages. People who'd been through the same thing. People who'd been manipulated, guilt, gaslit by the people who were supposed to protect them. And they all said the same thing. Thank you. I thought I was the only one. That's when I realized this wasn't just about him. It was about breaking the cycle. About refusing to carry his shame like it was mine. About standing in the truth, no matter how ugly, and saying, you don't get to write my story anymore. So, what did I do when I found out my dad faked his illness to drain me dry? I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't burn his house down or trash him on Facebook. I told the truth. And the truth did what I never could. It left him alone. They say when the truth comes out, it sets you free. What they don't tell you is that freedom can feel like grief. Like an empty room where something used to live. Like silence where there used to be noise, even if that noise was painful. After everything, after the confrontation, the lawsuit, the calls to family, and the unraveling of my dad's lies, I didn't feel triumphant. Not really. I felt raw. Like I'd torn off a mask I didn't even know I was wearing, and now I had to walk through the world with my real face. And that face, it was tired, it was angry, but it was finally mine. I stopped hearing from him after the legal notice. No calls, no emails, no fake health updates. Word got around that he'd left the city a few weeks later, sold off some stuff, cashed out what he could, and vanished into whatever new chapter he thought he deserved. I never got a court date. Never saw a dime. But I didn't need to. I had something better. Distance. Real, clean, unshakable distance. What hurt the most, though, wasn't the money. It wasn't even the lies. It was realizing that I had spent so many years holding on to this invisible rope between us, hoping, praying, that if I just pulled hard enough, he'd pull back. That someday he'd meet me halfway. He never did. And letting go of that rope, that's the real grief. Because once you stop hoping, the part of you that held on so tightly, she doesn't know what to do anymore. She's been trying so hard for so long, and now she has to rest. She has to become someone else. Someone who doesn't wait for phone calls that won't come. Someone who doesn't explain or excuse or cover up a grown man's cruelty just because he shares your DNA. But something unexpected happened in the quiet that followed. I found peace. Not the cheesy, bumper sticker kind. Not everything happens for a reason peace. I found earned peace. The kind that says, you don't have to carry what someone else dropped on you. The kind that shows up in your chest when you stop pretending and you finally tell the truth, even if your voice shakes while you say it. I started therapy again. Real therapy. The kind where you actually go there, even when it hurts. And I stopped trying to fix people who didn't want to be fixed. I reconnected with my brother. Someone else my dad had manipulated in quieter, more passive ways. And for the first time in years, we talked like siblings, not survivors. There was healing in that. I also stopped apologizing for my boundaries. For saying no. For choosing peace over obligation. And every time someone called me cold, or dramatic, or said I should just forgive him, I reminded myself of one simple truth. Forgiveness isn't owed. Especially when the apology never comes. I'm not the same person I was when I answered that phone call. That woman was scared, eager, desperate to be good. And she was good, but not in the way she thought. She was good because she gave love freely. Because she wanted to believe. Because she showed up, even when it cost her everything. But me? I'm different now. I'm not here to prove anything to anyone. Not to my father. Not to my family. Not to the voices in my head that still whisper, maybe he really was sick. I've learned to live with those whispers, to let them pass like smoke. Because the truth, the real, ugly, beautiful truth, he faked being sick. But I actually got better.